If Voss is as powerful as you say, then we need to make sure she's really on our side, or at least that she doesn't stab us in the back later. Eleanor sighed but didn't argue. She knew Naomi was right. The best spy in New Atlanta. Meanwhile, Hale was preparing to head south to Florida when he was approached by New Atlanta's best spy, Alexis Lex Carter. Lex was a ghost, an expert infiltrator, assassin, and informant who had kept New Atlanta from being overrun by enemies for years. Lex leaned against a table smirking. So you're going to Florida to convince a madman to go to war with Texas? Hale sighed. Something like that. Lex grinned. Good. I'm coming with you. Hale frowned. Why? Lex pulled out a worn map and tapped a location on the Florida coast. Because I have sources that say Deacon Rojas is already making moves. He's gathering forces, strengthening his fleet. And from what I've heard. Hale's eyes narrowed. What? Lex's grin disappeared. He already knows about Texas's ambitions. And he's preparing for war whether we help him or not. A new threat from the south. As the teams were preparing to leave, a scout rushed into Havenfield's command center, breathless and wide-eyed. Samira immediately stepped forward. What is it? The scout took a deep breath. A force is moving north out of Mexico. The room froze. Wyatt's expression darkened. How many? Thousands, the scout answered. And they're well armed. Not just raiders, an actual army. Zeke clenched his jaw. Damn. We should have seen this coming. Samira stepped closer to the scout. Who's leading them? The scout swallowed hard. They call themselves Los Renacidos, the Reborn. And their leader is a man known only as El Dragon. Los Renacidos, their goal is to reclaim everything Mexico lost to the US before the collapse. They believe the fall of America was destiny, a sign that the land should return to its rightful owners. They are highly organized, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. Their fleet is growing and they want the Gulf of Mexico, plus they'll fight both Texas and Florida for it. Wyatt cursed under his breath. This changes everything. Samira's mind raced. Los Renacidos wasn't just another warband. If they wanted Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California back, they wouldn't stop until they took it. And if they won? The entire balance of power in North America would shift. A three-way war. Hale ran a hand over his face. So let me get this straight. We've got Texas trying to dominate the South. Florida getting ready to fight Texas for control of the Gulf, and now a Mexican army sweeping in to claim all of it. Zeke let out a sharp laugh. Welcome to the New World, my friend. Samira looked at the map, her heart pounding. Eleanor and Naomi had to secure the Eastern Coalition before the warlords of New England made their move. Hale and Lex needed to convince Deacon Rojas that Texas was his real enemy before Florida was caught off guard. Samira, Wyatt, and Zeke had to uncover what Texas was really planning before El Dragon's forces pushed north. Everything was falling apart and the war hadn't even begun yet. The storm before the war. The weight of it all settled over Samira, but she pushed the anxiety away. They had a plan. Now it was time to execute it. Eleanor and Naomi departed first, heading north toward Virginia, where Admiral Rebecca Voss ruled the Eastern Coalition. Their mission was simple but dangerous. Secure an alliance before the New England warlords got involved. At the same time, Hale and Lex left for Florida, where they would try to sway Deacon Rojas into a war with Texas before he decided to go to war on his own. Samira, Wyatt, and Zeke remained behind, watching as the last of their allies disappeared over the horizon. They had their own task to uncover the truth about Texas and prepare for what came next. The world was shifting and Los Renacidos loomed just beyond the southern border. Eleanor and Naomi, the Eastern Coalition. Eleanor and Naomi rode north in a steam-powered carriage, flanked by a squad of Havenfield's best fighters. The journey was long, but when they finally arrived at the fortified city of Norfolk, Virginia, they knew they had entered a different world. Norfolk wasn't like New Atlanta or Iron Reach. It was a military fortress, complete with warships docked along the coast, steam-powered cannons lining the walls, and soldiers patrolling with precision. A woman stood at the center of it all, Admiral Rebecca Voss. She was older than Eleanor remembered, but no less formidable. Her piercing blue eyes cut through the two of them as she stood on the deck of an ironclad battleship with her arms crossed. "Eleanor Steele," Voss said, her voice like a steel blade. "I thought you were dead." Eleanor smirked. "You're not the only one." Naomi, always quick to cut to the chase, stepped forward. "We need to talk. There's a war coming, and if you don't join us you'll be fighting it alone." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Who's the enemy?" Eleanor exhaled. "Texas. Florida. And possibly Los Renacidos." For the first time Voss's stoic expression cracked. "Los Renacidos," she repeated, eyes narrowing. Naomi nodded. "They're moving north, and if we don't stand together they'll carve up the South for themselves." Voss was silent for a long moment before turning to one of her officers. "Prepare my war council. We have much to discuss." The Eastern Coalition was listening. Now they just had to convince them to fight. Hale and Lex, the Florida wild card. Meanwhile Hale and Lex sailed south, arriving at the coastal fortress of Deacon Rojas, Florida's self-proclaimed pirate king. His base, an old naval air station, had been transformed into a kingdom of raiders, smugglers, and warriors. Ships of all kinds filled the docks, some steam-powered, others retrofitted with sails and scavenged engines. Rojas himself was waiting for them, lounging in a massive throne made from scrap metal, old rifles, and broken swords. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gold rings on his fingers and a pistol at his hip. His long black hair was tied back and his grin was sharp enough to cut steel. "Well, well," Rojas said, his voice thick with amusement. "If it isn't New Atlanta's lapdogs." Hale rolled his eyes. "Good to see you too, Deacon." Lex, ever the strategist, cut straight to the point. "We know about Texas." Rojas's smile faded slightly. Hale leaned forward. "They're preparing for war. And from what I hear you are too." Rojas tapped his fingers against the arm of his throne. "Texas has been looking at the Gulf for years. They want it, but they'll have to take it from me first." Lex smirked. "We want the same thing, Deacon. If Texas expands you lose your kingdom. But if we work together, we can bury them before they even set foot on your beaches." Rojas studied them both, then threw his head back and laughed. "You want me to fight your war for you?" "No," Hale said. "We want you to fight your war and win." For a long moment, Rojas was silent. Then he grinned. "I like you too," he said. "Fine. I'll play." Samira and Wyatt, the truth about Texas. Back in New Atlanta, Samira, Wyatt, and Zeke were preparing to send scouts west when a messenger arrived. The scout was out of breath and his face pale. "They're coming," he gasped. Wyatt grabbed him by the shoulders. "Who?" The scout swallowed. "Los Renacidos. They've crossed into Texas." Samira's heart pounded. It was happening. And the war had just begun. Divided loyalties. Eleanor and Naomi stood at Admiral Voss's war table, maps and reports spread out before them. The dimly lit room smelled of salt, steel, and old parchment. Voss sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. The weight of the decision was on her shoulders. "I agree that Texas is a threat," she said. "But committing my fleet to an all-out war, that's not a choice I can make lightly." Before Eleanor or Naomi could respond, another voice cut through the room. "I advise against it, Admiral." A bald man with sharp eyes and a deep scar across his cheek stepped forward from the shadows. His name was Counselor Edwin Dre, one of Voss's most trusted advisors. The situation is more complicated than you think, Dre continued. He turned to Eleanor and Naomi, his gaze piercing. You assume the Gulf is a prize up for grabs. It is not. It already has a ruler. And they will not tolerate an invasion whether it comes from Texas, Florida, Mexico, or your alliance. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Who are you talking about? Voss finally leaned forward, clasping her hands together. Cyrus Blackwood. Naomi stiffened at the name. Blackwood. Dre nodded. The ruler of the Mississippi Dominion and every territory in the Deep South that isn't on the coast. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, it all belongs to him. Eleanor frowned. I've heard of him. No one crosses the Mississippi without his approval. But he's never shown interest in outside conflicts. Dre smirked. That's because he doesn't need to. He tapped the map pointing at the Mississippi River. Blackwood controls the biggest inland trade network in the country. You think Voss holds the East Coast because she's strong? No. She holds it because Blackwood allows it. His resources keep our fleet operational. His rail systems keep our economy alive. Voss nodded. He is my strongest ally. Eleanor clenched her jaw. And you think he wouldn't let us fight Texas for the Gulf? Dre shook his head. I don't think I know. Blackwood has no interest in letting anyone control the Gulf. He's built his empire on neutrality, trade, and balance. If Texas starts a war, he'll crush them before they reach the water. And if we go against his wishes. Voss exhaled. We risk losing everything. Naomi scoffed. So, what? You're just going to sit back and do nothing? Voss gave her a sharp look. I'm saying I don't need to fight Texas. Blackwood will handle them in his own way. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Naomi. This was not what they expected. Naomi shook her head. That's a dangerous gamble, Admiral. You're betting that Blackwood will stop Texas before they gain too much power. Dre smiled slightly. It's not a gamble. It's a certainty. Voss stood, signaling the meeting was over. You have your answer. The Eastern Coalition will not enter this war, yet. Eleanor and Naomi left the war room in silence. When they were alone, Naomi muttered, "This is bad." Eleanor nodded. Yeah. But it's not over. They had to warn Samira and Wyatt because if Texas found a way past Blackwood, there would be no stopping them.